the rights of animals, and they tried to pretend that this was an inherent duty which they as a society wanted to discharge. But here's the problem. If you listen to the sort of language they've been using, you realize that their case is actually extremely humanocentric. Listen, they said the reason why we are called animals' rights is because we can see human qualities in them. Because we, as human beings, feel sorry when one of them dies, and that's the only reason why we need to give them rights and protections. So in reality, their entire case circles back to the idea that human beings care about ourselves first. We only give rights to other people because it might make us feel good, or because those other creatures and animals might have a glimmer of humanity in them. So in reality, the case of team proposition was extremely humanocentric, and its concessions brought it down from the beginning. 2 points of contention. First, on which side better protects animals, and second, which side better protects people. First question, which side better protects animals? Now, the heart of team proposition's case was the assertion that animals are suffering. And in the first place, we told you, if the problem is that animal experimentation is cruel, then this is a problem-solution mismatch. Then use specific legislation, individual pieces of legislation which say no animal experimentation, which say don't drip acid in the eyes of rabbits, which say don't strangle a cat on the roadside. These are specific instruments of legislation which can eliminate the problem of animal suffering without the broader context of saying all animals deserve the exact same rights as humans do. So thank you. Second rebuttal, and more fundamentally, why should we care? We think that the reason why human beings, why we can foist obligations upon people is only when they consent to it. You can't just take my money away from me and give it to whoever you want. I have to agree to me providing my resources and my skills and resources in exchange for something else in a system of mutual agreement. The fundamental problem is, animals can't agree to anything. They can't participate in the social contract because, they are completely incapable of participating in civil society in any way. Their rebuttal to this concept was, but we don't want to rely on the whims of human beings to decide who we should give rights to. But our response is, come on, their case completely relies on the whims of human beings, right? They conceded all the way from their first speaker. It's arbitrary. Human beings have whimsically decided only those animals with sentience, specifically primates and dolphins, should get rights. This is an equally whimsical and arbitrary case which they presented to us. Third rebuttal, even if we accepted that we should care about the suffering of animals, their side is counterproductive. And here are 3 concrete harms my first speaker gave you which they didn't rebut. First, it results in the perverse incentive to eliminate animals which are encroaching your territory in secret. We saw on African plains when villagers started secretly eliminating protected elephants. Second, you decrease widespread public support, and thank you sir, for the cause of protecting animal rights. Because now people think, look, I'm already giving my tax dollars to pay for the conservation of some particular species. Why should I continue to support and donate to charities and welfare associations? Third, because you actually instigate political and public campaigns against this sort of legislature, so that people actively campaign to their politicians saying, take away these rights, we don't want this happening anymore, because now there are concrete harms happening to us. So even on the basis of preventing animals from suffering, their side does not improve the situation. Well, thank you, sir. Second general category within this point of contention, about the very arbitrary and whimsical criteria of sentience. Now, I want to point out there's been a massive case shift on their side. Their first speaker said sentience is defined as A, you must be able to recognize your face, and B, you must have friends, you must have a complex social network. Their second speaker then shifted and said, actually, it's just about the ability to cry and move our hearts. So this is a completely incoherent conception of what sentience is. But furthermore, we think many animals other than baboons can make us cry, right? Cats, come on guys, who doesn't like cats? Dogs, these are all this entire parameter they set in the first speaker has completely collapsed the moment the second speaker said anyone with the ability to cry now deserves protection. Furthermore, we told you not only is it arbitrary, but it extends to absurdity. And here's the problem with extending to absurdity. It takes money and resources to protect the rights of various groups of people. If you want to construct special places for us to store animals where they'll be fed and where they'll be given a decent standard of living, that actually takes away money which can be spent on public schools, which can be spent housing human beings and people on the ground. So on all these counts, we think their side's policy, by extending to absurdity, thank you sir, actually harms people. Let's finally deal with this spurious idea that babies deserve rights as well, that babies can't actualize their rights, but we give them rights anyway. No, we don't give babies a full spectrum of rights. Babies cannot, aside from the fact that babies are always under the care of someone else as they conceive it, we think these rights are slowly given to them as they actualize their ability to participate in society. Animals can never reach that standard of participation. Therefore, we don't accord them the same spectrum of rights. Second contention, thank you sir, which side protects people better? Let's point out in the first place that they completely conceded when my third speaker gave them a point of information that human priorities come first. He asked him, would you charge a person, thank you sir, no thank you madam, for killing a baboon with the death penalty? And she said, well no, because we must allow for other human priorities. Thank you for conceding that if we can prove a sufficient extent of harm to humans, then their case collapses. So here are the concrete harm to humans. First, we curtail their ability to survive. The second speaker had this cavalier rebuttal, but she told us that the vast majority of primates and dolphins don't exist in cities. So exactly, thank you sir. It's not the cities which will receive the brunt of the damage, It's the villagers who rely on having farmland to survive, to grow crops so that they can eat. Entire farms that will be inaccessible because there are elephants wandering around the plains. Entire villages which depend on deforestation and the development of land will collapse because there is no food for them to eat because they can no longer profit off the land which they have there. So on all these counts, the greatest harm accrues not to the urban cities, but to villages and farms off in rural areas. Secondly, we told you there's a massive opportunity cost, and this opportunity cost is extremely harmful. Consider the massive burden of that policy, which would be equivalent to granting welfare to animals. We think this would mean A, less welfare for human beings, which is kind of bad because many human beings are living below the poverty line. B, it means that we can't pay for even basic things like school, being able to afford food for people. So thank you, madam. And on all these counts, we think this concretely harms people as well. I'm translating here to my point of substantive, called the end of the ecosystem and the rise of the robots. The second half is going to be a little smaller. First part, about the end of the ecosystem. Now, we think that death and physical injury, unfortunate as it is commonplace in the natural world. And here is the biggest problem with their case. They argued that they would have to actively enforce the protection of the rights of primates and dolphins. What does this mean? It means if a primate is about to be consumed by a natural predator in the wild, their policy will make it incumbent upon us to go out and rescue that primate. In fact, it would require to eliminate all non-primate predators, I'll take you in a moment, who exist in the wild, who might pose a threat to these individuals. Yes, sir?
So by your own logic, we can't really sue sharks anyway because they're not sentient creatures. But if ever we need to drag a baboon down to court, then we could just prove the sentence in court. That's what courts are for.
Sir, but how will a baboon prove its sentence? We don't understand how, unless he has a human advocate and a human lawyer, in which case you still rely on the whims of that human advocate and that human lawyer to set that particular parameter. Moving back, we think there's compromises upon the natural regulating system which the ecosystem relies upon. Because they will have to actively enforce, protections which defend individual primates in the wild against other predators. This leads to the collapse of the entire ecosystem, and we think this is a terrible, terrible thing. Furthermore, we think they will have to defend the territories of animals from encroachment by other animals. In the end, the upshot of their policy is they will prioritize the protections of one specific class of animals above all else. We argue how this is not whimsical, as the second speaker liked to say. So on all these counts, we think that policy is entirely arbitrary, is whimsical, and damages the ecosystem. Here's where I integrate several rebuttals against the second speaker's substantive. She said, we want to construct a humane society. Yes, but humanity must be explored on its own accord. We don't think we rely on governments to tell us, oh, this is something which is moral, therefore you must do this. We think that we need time for human beings to decide for themselves whether they want to expand the ambit of their own moral constructs to include other species as well. So on these counts, their side in fact turns people away from the cause of constructing a more humane society, as my first speaker told you about. No response from the side to that point. We think we take this point. Finally, about robots. We think in the long term, their side will have to enforce the protection of strong AI as well. Here. This will lead to the Matrix. This is a priori there. On all these counts, we're very proud to stand.